So today there was a new RRG released, version 1.3, and there's quite a few big changes and some great information about the upcoming Spirit of the Rebellion, along with some erratas. So if you like rules as much as I do, then hang on to your pants, because here we go. So one of the first changes we see in the new RRG, and you'll see in the red text there, is that they now say that specials have a value of 0 that cannot be increased or decreased, and blanks have a value of 0 that cannot be increased or decreased. Now I'm assuming this change is made to clarify C-3PO, since you could use C-3PO to resolve a 2 disrupt as a special. People were saying, hey, does that mean I can resolve the special twice? No, you cannot. You can only resolve it one time, and it basically has a value of 0. So another significant change here is the concept of the set-aside zone. Now each player has a set-aside zone. At the beginning of the game, your dice that you're not using are set aside, and they would be in the set-aside zone. Cards can also enter or leave the set-aside zone. Cards in the set-aside zone are open knowledge unless otherwise noted. Defeated characters are put in the set-aside zone, and some cards like premonitions or battlefields that are not chosen during setup also use this zone. One thing you'll see when we get to the erratas is that hyperspace jump is placed in the set-aside zone once it has been played, so that you can't recur it with hyperlooping. There are changes here to the section on extra actions. Now it says that each action and any abilities its resolution triggers must fully resolve before an additional action is taken. Actions wait to be resolved in the order they were created in. They don't enter the queue like other game effects. So there's an example here where a player plays an upgrade that has ambush on Rey, while their opponent has Django ready. They now have 2 additional actions to resolve, one from the ambush, one from Rey's ability. They use one of the additional actions to activate Rey, and as a consequence of Rey's activating, Django's after ability meets its triggering condition and is added to the queue. Because additional actions exist outside of the queue, waiting for the current action to complete, Django's ability resolves before the Rey player spends their second additional actions. What the heck does that mean, you ask? That's a good question. So let's look at a concrete example here. Let's say that the Rey player here plays a holdout blaster on Rey. This generates 2 additional actions for the Rey player. So she now has 2 actions to take. Her first action she decides to do is she rolls in her dice by activating Rey. Now she still has 1 additional action to take, but because they exist outside of the queue is paused right now because Django has an ability that he can use to react to Rey activating. So he rolls in, and then the Rey player takes an additional action, so she could discard 2 cards in this case, or take a resource or whatnot. Now, what happens in this case where Django has fast hands and force speed, which really complicates things a lot here. So what happens in this situation? The Rey player plays a holdout blaster. She gains 2 actions. She decides to use her first action to roll in Rey. She rolls in her dice like so. And then Django now reacts with his after ability and rolls himself in. And let's say that he has a force speed special as well with fast hands on him. Now, the Rey player has 1 action, and because actions are taken in the order that they are generated, if the Django player were to resolve the force speed special using fast hands, they would get 2 actions, but the Rey player still has 1 more action left before the Django player can take their actions. So there has been a change to one of the examples in the passing section of the RRG. It used to be that if you had backup muscle that had no damage on it, when you exhausted it, because it didn't move any damage, it actually was considered to be a pass. However, now the definition of changing the game state is used more loosely, and when a player exhausts backup muscle because backup muscle has now been exhausted, something has happened and the action does not count as a pass. So another clarification that's been made in the RRG is under damage. It says, unless specified, damage is neither ranged nor melee. That damage, in quotes, is short for that amount of damage. So in a concrete example here, let's say that we have this situation where we have Dooku's rolled in and he has a 2 melee showing, and Jabba has Hunker Down on it. Now normally Hunker Down would be removed if melee damage was dealt to him. In this case, the Akbar player plays reversal, and then he takes the 2 melee damage and resolves it into Jabba. It would remove the die and do 2 damage to Jabba, but because it is that damage, as we see here, it is no longer melee or ranged. It just is regular damage, and the Hunker Down stays on. So one significant change to the RRG is how they decided to work the queue. Now, after abilities are said to enter the queue, but before abilities don't enter the queue, they interrupt it. I believe that before abilities did enter the queue, which completely changed how this works. So also additional actions that are gained do not enter the queue, but instead wait their turn, since a player can only resolve one action at a time. So there's an interesting example here. We have a player that plays squad tactics with 2 Tusken Raiders and Captain Phasma on their team. Both of the Tusken Raiders have the Guardian keyword, and since this is a before ability, it interrupts the game and does not enter the queue. One of the Tusken Raiders is defeated by the damage it takes with Guardian, and the redeploy keyword on the gaffy stick attached enters the queue. However, because Squad Tactics is currently in the queue waiting for the Guardian ability to resolve, the redeploy keyword goes to the end of the line because it is an after ability. Now that one Tusken Raider is defeated, Squad Tactics activates the other Tusken Raider, it rolls the dice into the pool, which completes the resolution of Squad Tactics, and then the gaffy stick is redeployed to either it or Captain Phasma, and it cannot be rolled in by the other Tusken Raider. So for a more visual example, let's say the Captain Phasma here and 2 Tusken Raiders is set up. The Captain Phasma player plays Squad Tactics, and there's a 2 damage showing on the other side of the board here. So she decides to roll in her Tusken Raider with Squad Tactics, using the Guardian ability to kill the Tusken Raider here. Because it is a before ability, the Guardian, the Tusken Raider dies and does not get to roll in their dice. Now, because Squad Tactics is in the queue and the redeploy keyword is an after ability, the Squad Tactics has to fully resolve first before redeploy can happen. So what would happen is then the second Tusken Raider would roll in, and then Squad Tactics would be completely resolved, and then the redeploy would happen. And the Phasma player could put the gaffy stick on Phasma or the Tusken Raider. Of course, because the Tusken Raider is already activated, they can't roll a gaffy stick in this turn, so this would probably be the better choice. So next we move on to replacement effects. A replacement effect uses the word instead somewhere in its text. So second chance is a replacement effect. Now, it goes on to add that some replacement effects that are part of before abilities use the word would be in their text. These effects are faster than other before abilities, and no abilities can be triggered off of the original effect. So in this example, second chance says before attached character would be defeated, instead heal 5 damage from it and discard this upgrade. So because second chance is a replacement effect that says would be, it's faster than other before abilities, like General Grievous's ability. Regardless of who controls the battlefield, second chance triggers first before General Grievous could steal a weapon off a yellow character. And since the character is no longer defeated, General Grievous's ability is toast. So let's look at a more concrete example here. So we have this set up here. General Grievous is rolled in. He's got 5 damage on the board. The hired gun only has 3 hit points remaining, and he's got a DL 44 on him. So General Grievous resolves the 3 into the hired gun, which would kill him, but he doesn't because he decides to trigger his second chance here. Second chance goes away. The hired gun heals 5 damage for himself, leaving it with 4 hit points. Because second chance triggered and replaced the defeated effect, General Grievous's ability that says before an opponent's character is defeated can't happen. There's also a small change to move. Now it says an upgrade with a play restriction can be moved to any character as the upgrade is not being played. So this is likely been put in because of Cargo Hold, which is the new battlefield in Spirit of the Rebellion. It says when you claim, you move an upgrade from a character to another character controlled by the same player. So this gives rise to all these questions. You know, if it says red character only, can I move it to a red character, etc., etc. So the trick is that all these play restrictions only happen when a card is being played, but when it's being moved, it bypasses all that. These two are right in the same section, so I figured I'd mention them together. First, there's a new thing called Replace, which says when an upgrade is discarded to decrease the cost of another upgrade, the new upgrade replaces the old one. I don't think this is anything new, but I figured I'd mention it since it is here. But what's changed is rolling. It says when a card refers to rolling a die, this applies to both rolling it into your pool and re-rolling it if it was already in your pool. So one thing that I misunderstood, and you may have as well, is with blackmail, it says after you roll this die, any opponent may give you 1 resource to remove this die. I thought that meant when you roll it into the pool initially, they could pay you to remove the die and that's it. But apparently, anytime the die is rolled or re-rolled, your opponent can pay a resource to remove it. So if I rolled in blackmail and got a blank, you could say, that's cool, you can keep it there because it's a blank. But then say you re-roll it later and get a 3 discard, I can say, whoa, I don't want to lose 3 of my cards. Let me pay a resource to get rid of that. Next, we have the biggest change that we see in the RRG here. They've added an errata section. And everybody knows that the Hyperloop was being a problem in the meta, and it was going to get worse with the advent of planetary uprising. They've changed it now so that hyperspace jump is set aside instead of being discarded when you play it, which means that you could Hyperloop technically twice, and then both copies of your hyperspace jump are gone, and that's that. We know that it wasn't really winning a lot of tournaments yet, but when planetary uprising comes in and your hyperlooping is not just giving you a dice advantage, but making your opponent take 4 damage every time you do it, that was going to cause some serious problems. Next, we have the Outer Rim Smuggler, which was going to cause potential problems as well. This one here, the issue was that if you had 2 Outer Rim Smugglers and a blue character, you could play your last card being Return of the Jedi to take Return of the Jedi back into your hand from your discard pile, which would cost you a resource but net you 1 resource from each smuggler, and then you could do it again and again and again and again and again, and basically create infinite resources. If you happen to be ahead on tiebreakers at the time, you could theoretically time out the game by doing this over and over again until the time ran out and win. So it was going to create some pretty serious negative player experiences. So what they did was they errated it, so now it says the first time each round you play the last card from your hand, gain 1 resource. Before, it just was each time you play the last card from your hand, gain a resource. So that definitely shuts that down. And it's nice to see. I mean, the card's not even out yet, and they've taken the initiative to nip that in the bud before it happens, and I applaud FFG for doing this, because I was pretty concerned about both of these. I'm still a little bit concerned about FN 2199 with 25 weapons and that sort of thing, but that's another story for another time. They've also added a clarification to Second Chance here. It says, when healing with Second Chance, any excess damage that would be dealt to the character is ignored. Thus, if the character is defeated by 5 damage, you always heal the character down to 5 damage less than its health. So if you look at this example here, the hired gun at the bottom of the screen here has 1 hit point remaining, and the hired gun on the opposing side has a 3 range for 1 and a +2 range. So because he has to resolve these 2 dice together, he goes like this. He does 5 damage to the hired gun, which would basically put him up to 9 hit points. Second Chance triggers to heal him by 5. So he'd be sitting at 9 minus 5 is 4. So in this example, the hired gun at the top of the screen could say, I'm resolving range damage. First, he would resolve the 3 into this hired gun at the bottom to trigger Second Chance and heal him for 5. And then, in that same action, resolve 5 more damage into the hired gun, which would then result in him being at 9 health and being dead. So there is a number of other card clarifications, particularly with regards to the Spirit of the Rebellion cards. You can see here the Ascension gun. It says that you can only use the ability on battlefields brought to the game as part of a player's deck that are in the set-aside zone. Blackmail says an opponent can give you 1 resource after each time you reroll Blackmail, as well as roll it into the pool. C3PO says C3PO does not allow you to resolve the die without paying its resource cost, nor does he allow you to ignore modifiers. So in a hired gun deck with overkills and that sort of thing, it's less useful. The other thing is that C3PO can turn other dice into specials, at which point the value of the die does change to 0. So that's what we saw from that mention before with specials and blanks being value of 0. Director Krennic says the Death Trooper die comes from your set-aside zone. If there is no Death Trooper die in your set-aside zone, then his ability does nothing. Also, if you're using Death Troopers in your team, then you must have additional Death Trooper dice to use with Krennic. Cargo Hold says you can move an upgrade to a character that has 3 upgrades, but one of the upgrades has to be discarded. This would be decided by the controller of the character, of course. FN 2199 says if you do not resolve the weapon die rolled in with his ability immediately, then it stays in your pool until resolved or removed as per the normal rules. Force Illusion is clarified to say that if you discard less cards than the amount of damage being dealt by running of cards in your deck, then none of that damage is blocked. That makes sense to me, since the discarding the cards is part of the cost of the card, which means that if you cannot pay the cost, then the effect doesn't happen. Force Lightning is clarified that you can remove an opponent's blank. I figured that one was kind of obvious, since it didn't say a die you control or an opponent's die specifically, then you assume that it's any die. Momentum Shift says if all of your characters already have their maximum number of shields, then you cannot move a shield. Okay. Premonitions, which is really interesting here. It says if your opponent has a copy of Premonitions in their set-aside zone, you can play the card in it for free and then discard it to their discard pile. You cannot look at the card before you play Premonitions. So this actually allows you to effectively steal the opponent's card off of Premonitions. If they put an ATST on their Premonitions and you played Premonitions first, then you could actually take their ATST and put it into play for free yourself, which is pretty huge. For Salvo, it says if the die has a resource cost, you pay the cost one time but deal the damage to each character. Training says the second die comes from your set-aside zone. If you do not have another of that character's die, then this ability does nothing. It also goes on to clarify that playing a second copy of Training on a character does nothing, as the character is already elite. There's a few new things in the FAQ as well. The first one says, can I use Sith Holocron to switch an upgrade onto a Royal Guard? The answer is yes. Switching an upgrade onto a character is not the same as playing one. So even though the Royal Guard says you cannot play blue abilities on this character, you can still get blue abilities on that character by switching them, because switching is not playing. Next, we have a question that says, can I exhaust or play a card that has an action that I cannot fully resolve in order to stall the round, like Backup Muscle with no damage on it, or playing Noble Sacrifice when I have no blue characters? And the answer is yes. Playing a card from your hand, even if it has no effect, removes the card from your hand and does not count as doing nothing, because it changes the game state. The same applies to exhausting a card or re-rolling a die to its same side. If your opponent has a Mind Probe special showing, and you have no way to actually play a card to get it out of your hand, you can just play it to no effect and get rid of it. I mean, if it was an event that had a cost to it, you still have to pay the cost. But let's say you had Intimidate and I had no shields, you could play that just to get it out of your hand and take that less damage. Another question here says, what happens to a character's dice that are still in the dice pool when they're readied again, like Balatique or Leadership? Are they removed? Are they re-rolled when the character activates again? The answer is, if a character is readied, none of their dice are removed. If they activate again, then any dice that have been returned to the character are rolled in like normal, but nothing happens to their dice already in the pool. So let's take a closer look at this in an example here. Let's say that we've got this situation here where everybody's already activated. Balatique has a 1 range and a +2 range showing on his dice here. This First Order Stormtrooper here has 1 hit point remaining, so Balatique could do this and put 3 damage into it, but it's unnecessary. So let's say that he resolves the 1 damage into this guy over here. It then kills him, and then Balatique can use his after ability to ready. The F11D die stays in the pool here because it wasn't resolved. And now when Balatique rolls back in, he does this, and he rolls in these 2 dice here, which were on the appropriate cards, and he can hope to connect with that 2 damage. There's another question here. What happens if I use Obi-Wan Kenobi's Before ability with a Rejuvenate or other healing effect? Does he remain in play since he no longer has damage on him equal to his health? The answer is, he does not remain in play. Obi-Wan Kenobi took damage equal to his health, and without a replacement effect, there is no way to change this. Since a healing ability like Rejuvenate is not a replacement effect, Obi-Wan is set aside after the event he plays is resolved. The next question says, if my opponent has a TIE Pilot die and several other dice showing range damage, what happens if I play Dodge? The answer is, since Dodge removes all of the dice at the same time, only the TIE Pilot die is removed. Though if there are 2 different TIE Pilot dice in their pool, then all of their dice are protected from Dodge, which means that neither of the TIE Pilot dice are removed. This is an interesting one here. It says, can I roll in a blackmail die and resolve it with fast hands before an opponent can give me a resource to remove it? The answer is yes. The abilities are simultaneous, so you can choose to resolve either one in order of your choice. This does not talk about who controls the battlefield, because technically you're controlling blackmail and you control fast hands, so because you control both of those cards, you actually get to choose what order those abilities trigger in. Since in this case, rolling in the character that has blackmail and has fast hands on them ends up being the same triggering condition. So that wraps up all the notable changes in version 1.3 of the RRG. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you can't make it to Worlds this week, be sure to check out the Knights of Ren's coverage of the event, and while you're on their page, be sure to check out the latest episode of their podcast. Thanks for watching, everyone.